It's a deep embarrassment for me to harmonize to the second color in my profile. You see, the whole business about the 5 and the 6 is look where they come from. They come from the 2 and the 3, respectively. And it's very important to see the root of that, because only the foundation that's laid in that sense in the 2 and the 3 is ultimately what is brought out as a force to influence the whole world. Yes, something like that. So when you're looking at the second color and you're looking at the second color and its fundamental relationship to the larger questions of life, that those larger questions of life are not answered by the master, but they are presented by the heretic. In other words, it's very important to see this relationship between the second color and the fifth color. Now, by the way, I'm not a fifth color, but I am a fifth line personality. And so I resonate to the conditioning that's there, that is the conditioning that's there within the context of how the fifth color operates. And you can see that the keynote of the fifth color is guilt. And its theme is to be the conditioner or the conditioned. Now look at my game. You know, this is what the heretic does. And now, of course, what I do as a heretic is that I condition you to decondition your conditioning. But that's what the theme is. And the thing to recognize is about where we are, because it's really what I want to talk about in this last segment with the fifth and sixth color, to understand that this polarity between the 5 and the 6, we are at a change that's taking place in that polarity. And it's a very, very important change that's taking place because of the mutative quality of the sixth line. In other words, what we're going through is we're going through a transition in which the example is set. That the example in the past has always been set through the imposition of conditioning. And it is the heretic that has always done that conditioning. And it is either conditioned the theism or conditioned the anti-theism, whatever the case may be. But the way in which the heretic has operated is that it conditions others. That's why it's often deeply resented and burnt at the stake. Because it's very busy doing that conditioning job. And the way in which we have operated as a civilization for so long. Because remember, for most of our history, and at least for the 9-centered history, that what we're looking at is that the sixth line has yet to come to its blossoming of mutation. Which really isn't going to take deep impact until we get into the sixth line phase after 2027. So we're dealing with a transition point in which, in terms of my own mythology, however one wants to interpret that, in terms of my own mythology, I'm the last heretic. In other words, my job is the finishing of the conditioning business, because the end of the conditioning business is really where we're going. It is not the responsibility of one to condition the other. It is not the way in which the process works. And as you can see, that the heretic does not speak out of developmental processes. It's only the sixth color that in that sense harmonizes and learns from the personal developmental process. In other words, when you're dealing with the fifth color is simply going to one of the basic roots, and it's saying the most important thing to universalize is our spirituality. The most important thing, after all, that is the focus of the fifth color. And it is the focus of the fifth line as a heretic. The most important thing to universalize is spirituality. So me, who has never been spiritual, I still don't think of myself as being spiritual. I tend to think of myself as being alive. That I end up being a heretic that actually brings spirituality, but brings it through a mechanical structure. But it's my role to be a heretic, and only through my capacity to condition you. See, I never forget that I started only with not self students. So, I had to seduce them. I had to condition them. They had to fall in love with me. I had to fall in love with design. I had to use every trick in the book, and not consciously, because it's not conscious. It's just the way it works. It's the way I'm designed to be. And of course, this is the old way, and I got to watch all of that so clearly that what I was doing was replacing one set of conditions with another. I had a friend of mine, Nikitana. I was sitting one day, and he said to me, well, what are you going to call this? And I said, well, I think I'm going to call it the human design system. And he said, oh, don't call it a system. And he was going on and on and on about all of this. I have the role of conditioning beings to a new conditioning system. Fortunately, it's about conditioning yourself to decondition yourself to be yourself. So we go through this whole convoluted way, but please understand that's why I've always rejected what usually goes along with this kind of conditioning. I am your guru, honor me, all of this stuff, all of that trip, everything else. Part of my process has always been, I don't want to be your conditioner. I mean, what a joke. Because it is, because you can't escape that within the role. And this, please see, this is the old way. I'm the old way. I really am. I'm the end of a process. This is the old way. And the new way is upon us. And that new way is really very beautiful because it isn't keynoted with guilt. Oh, how many people I upset when I told them their design. How guilty they were that they didn't know before. How that hurt them. How guilty they were that they lived their lives that way. And all of that stuff. I mean, I know that movie. It's the Heretic movie. And it's about to become a rerun, It's going to go on late night television, and eventually it'll only be at 3 o'clock in the morning. And eventually you're just going to have to download it from the web if you want it. And finally it'll be gone because we won't need it anymore. And the real mystery is that it's very hard to sense that at this moment, because all around us you're seeing the very, very last attempts of the fifth color through the fifth line theme to still control the direction of the world. We live in a time of false prophets. We live in a time of all kinds of conditioning forces, positive, negative, and everywhere in between. There are all kinds of human beings trying to impose their way on the other. It's all over the place. And the thing to see about that is that when things are about to die is when there are so many examples of them. This is the end of the road for the fifth color theme. It's the end of the road. And so it's very, very important to grasp this transition between fifth and sixth color, between fifth and sixth line, and what that means for us in terms of our development as a species. When you look at the second color, we saw that the second color asks a basic question, and the basic question of the second color is why? And it's looking for that larger why, that larger reason. And it is a question that is being asked. In other words, it's a question that is rarely answered. It's a question that's being asked, and it's part of our, basic structure of being open to a larger whole. What you get to see in the fifth color is that the fifth color presents the answer to that why. Now, whether that answer is correct or not, that's not the point of this. But the point of this is to understand the role in that sense of the fifth color and the way it conditions or motivates the fifth line. In other words, that it needs to bring an answer to that why. And in bringing that answer to that why, trying to condition those who need to have an answer, trying to condition them to that answer. Here is the answer for you. Here's the answer to your question. After all, that is the thing about human design that I love so much, is that it not only provides you with answers, but it actually shows you where the questions are. In other words, all of those things are there. And so the ultimate role in that sense of the fifth color is to find and express universally, in that sense, what is the why. Now remember, it's coming from the why. But when you look at the third color, which is where the 6 comes from, when you look at the third color says, how? Like the fourth color. They both say, how? How do I get there? How do I develop? How do I grow? This is the how. And in that how, they're seeking development. Now, there's something very magical that happens to the 6-line being. And it's reflected through the way in which the 6th color motivates them. We know that in this mutative phase, all 6-line beings, 6-line profiles, need to go through in their life 3 distinct stages. And that first stage is how. That's the first stage. The first stage is the resonance to the third color, 3rd-line combination. In other words, how do I develop? And when you get to the end of the 6-line process and they come off the roof, the polarity to the first phase, it's not how, it's who. You see, in the end, it is all about being complete within yourself. This is what the role model is. Complete within yourself. I will give you a taste of the future. And in giving you a taste of the future, there's something that has been taking place for many years, became popularized in recent years, in which you see that heretics, spiritual guides, change people's names. Give them new names. Change their names. One of the most interesting phenomena of 6-line people coming off the roof is that they change their own name. And they give themselves a name because they finally find out who they are. And in finding out who they are, they separate themselves from the name of their family. In other words, they stand alone with their own name. Now, if any of you live long enough, you'll see that phenomena, an extraordinary phenomena, in which people begin to name themselves. What's that? You mean in the sense of those people going through that process? Oh, yeah, absolutely. Because, of course, the whole thing about the 6-line mutation is that you finally are a role model outside of the influence and direction of others. You are your own authority. You are your own truth. And in that, names have great power. I mean, names have great power. They are great conditioning forces in our lives. I know what it's like to carry a name, and I know what that does. You know, it changes who you are. And it's very important to recognize that this is going to be one of those flavors that you'll see out there, is that you'll see these 6-line beings and they'll be coming off the roof and all of a sudden they want people to call them this or that or whatever the case may be. In other words, they will find the who. And this is the whole movement. It's our movement. It's our whole evolution. And our whole evolution is getting to the point where individual power, individual uniqueness, individual integrity, that's the only criteria. The only criteria. If everybody behaves correctly according to their truth, according to their nature, you don't need heretics. You know, you don't need conditioners. You don't need any of those things. So this is the process that we come to. So when we're here at the 6th color, this innocence, it's the innocence that's given a name. It's the child that takes its unique flavor. It is its own true self. And of course, because of the nature of how this works, all six-line beings go through this process. And they go through this process in which most of them are devastated by the how phase. In other words, the developmental process, because it's a trial and error process, because it can be full of suffering and so forth and so on, taints them in such a way that they do not get to that point in which they can come off the roof. They can come off the roof as themselves, living what is correct for themselves and discovering in that who they are. Now that's the theme of my work, is to give human beings an opportunity to discover who they are. And to be able to do that is my way of providing the answer to the why. Why are we the way we are? Well, here's the mechanics of that. But the real development, and remember, the 6 is out of that third theme of development. The real development comes when each and every human being then follows their pattern, lives out the perfection of what it is to be them, to discover who they are. Because you can only discover who you are when you live out your design. There is no other way. And the moment you discover who you are, you discover something else. You're a different person. It's our process, after all, and I don't want you to confuse this with it being specific in that sense to any kind of configuration, because what I'm describing here is a much larger evolutionary process that we all have aspects of all of it within us. All these colors are within us. We meet all the colors all the time, as we meet all the lines all the time, whatever. And one of the things to recognize, it's like the nature of the fifth color and the recognition within the fifth color that the answer to everything is that everything is about being conditioned and conditioning. And everything is about being conditioned and conditioning. Now, the moment that you understand how that truly works, rather than we're being conditioned by, by the spirit of the west wind or, whatever those things are, when we finally get a concretized answer, in other words, when we can finally see how the conditioning, how the conditioner, how these processes actually work, it's not about staying there. If this were not my job, because this is my job now, if this wasn't my job, I wouldn't pay any attention to human design. Why should I? I'm awake. I mean, it's not like I have to pay attention to, what's there and what isn't there and this and that and blah, 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 and this gate and that gate and this conditioning and that conditioning. Blah, 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 blah. It doesn't matter to me. I would be totally liberated if I didn't have to do this for work, and I wouldn't think about it because I wouldn't have to think about it. And of course, that's what transcendence is. That is, transcendence is when you get to a point that you really do understand how things work. And when you understand how you work, then you can let go. And that's the whole point. And of course, what we still have on the planet now, right now, because we're at the end of this era, is that we have all of these different forces trying to claim that answer. And so everybody is caught up in all of that, the conditioners and the conditioning. The real transcendence for us is that once you get the answer, you move on. And what you move on to is innocence. Innocence. And the innocence is about the pureness of existence. Oh, it's deeply spiritual. Because it really is the recognition that everything happens. Everything happens. And that as long as you're correct within yourself, everything happens for you. It's one of the great pleasures in my life to realize that the entire Biverse is here for me. And I don't say that out of vanity. It's just a reality for me. I don't do anything and everything works. There's nothing that I do and everything gets done. All the old stuff that I read about, I live it. And I live it without being responsible for it, or directing it, or choosing it, or selecting it. It just happens to me. And that's the whole point of all of this. You see, we're at the point where we're still being satisfied by the knowledge of the answer. And constantly reproving to ourselves that that answer seems legitimate. You know, you look at your kids, you look at this, you look at your lover, you check this, you check the cross that day, you look at the energy that way, and you keep on working with the condition process. And it's only when you finally get to that point where you're 7 years down the road of experimenting with your design, when you finally begin to experience without any kind of question, that's the moment you can let go of all of that. And that's where we're moving. We're moving towards a global 6-line theme. Nobody's going to want to carry this stuff around. Nobody. The time of conditioners and conditioning of heretics, nobody's going to give them any attention. That time is coming. And the demand on us is that we have beings who can enter into that phase and enter into that phase innocent, being both observer and observed. Nothing else. In other words, they're alive. That's all. I had somebody come up to me one day and said, "What's it all for?" And I said, "Oh, just to be alive." Because that's the truth. And when you finally get to the point that you have an answer, you'll discover that all you're left with is you're alive. That's it. And that's what's so special. I mean, that's what's so special. And then to see something even better than all of that. That by being alive as yourself, everything in this life is there to nurture you. Everything, no matter how it looks. Because the moment that you're just there and you're just being is the moment that you see that is all that has ever been required. Ever. That's being enlightened, awake, holy, whatever you want to call all that stuff. To me, it's being alive. And this is the magic at the end of the process, because it's not about how or why or when, it's who. It's you. And that all that matters is that you're alive and correct in that. And if we had all kinds of people on this planet who were correct within themselves, you would be astonished at the change of the vibration. This is what we're moving towards. And what we're moving away from is this need within us, to be able to have all of the answers. And as long as there weren't an answer available, there was no way that we were ever going to get to the 6-line phase. And of course, all of this is designed. We're living in a time now where this is the last chance. Till 2027. It's the last chance for us. This has been going on since 1615. It's the last chance for us to find out exactly how things work and why they work the way they do. And we're going to go into a dark age like you've never seen. Different from the last one. But the next one is everybody within themselves. And everybody within themselves, this is a huge step for humanity. It's a huge step. And from 1960 to 1927, until 2027, this is the framework in which we can finally get to the information that we need to understand. And the last time, in terms of global cycles, that the 61-1 had this kind of power was 19,000 years ago in the garden. It's the last time it happened.
The 61-1.
So what we're living in right now in terms of a global cycle is a window of resolution. Resolution of all those questions that began at the beginning of our consciousness process. And here we are with this window. And once we get past this window, there isn't going to be this same energy in the world to solve this problem and to find out how this works and blah. All of that's going to go away. It's going to go away overnight. But it's going to fade. And as the generation that's born still within this cycle dies off, then you are going to go in that sense, into a relative dark age. It's like all these people who think technology is just going to keep on getting more incredible. No. By 2027, the door is going to shut on that. And you know, the future where you think you're going to have all these zippy machines, you're going to have 2027 machines that are styled differently in 2144. In other words, we're coming to the end of a period of incredible development, incredible understanding and grasping of things, but it will come to an end. And when it's over, it's us. It's all about us after that. And it's all about the pure existence. It's what we're here to be.